So we look now at the human emotional system, in particular affects and affect theory. This is just a brief introduction or refresher. We won't go into all the detail in this part. Affect theory tells us that there are 9 fundamental affects shared across all people. 2 positive affects, 1 neutral affect, and 6 negative affects. It's just, in evolutionary terms, it's the nature of the human experience that we have more negative affects than positive affects. Now, we've seen that affects are an aspect of the firmware, so they sit below consciousness, and their job is to filter out stimulus or stimuli that are coming into the body and work out what's important to us. In this sense, Nathanson describes them as a set of spotlights. Imagine yourself in a darkened theatre and there's 100 people on stage all doing things, and you don't know who to attend to. You don't know who to look to. But suddenly a spotlight will appear on one of them, and his microphone will come up, and you pay attention to that. And then the spotlight will drop, and a spotlight will come up on another player, and her microphone will come up, and you'll pay attention to that. And that's the affect system's job, is to pay attention to particular stimulus that particularly the brainstem and lower parts of the brain have decided are important at that point. Now, from the 9 affects, Tompkins pointed out to us that we are hardwired to want to increase positive affect and decrease negative affect. So a lot of our actions can be understood in terms of seeking positive affect and avoiding negative affect, or reducing negative affect. These are the 9 affects. The 2 positive ones are interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy. The neutral affect, surprise, startle, just acts as a reset button, so that's why it's neutral. The negative affects are fear, distress, anger, disgust and dismay, and shame, humiliation. Now, you'll notice some of the affects are listed as a range: interest to excitement, enjoyment through to joy, and some simply a single word, disgust, for example. We're only going to look at 3 of these affects today, but more than happy to take you through the rest of them. And it gives us some insight into how we and our students behave. If we look at the positive affects in particular that we're going to look at is interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy. So many of these affects are triggered by an absolute level of stimulus coming into the body. Interest, excitement, for example, is triggered by an increase in stimulus, an increase in central nervous system activity. So the simplest way of explaining this is to say, well, as somebody is telling you a joke, you're engaged and you're trying to work out what the punchline, where it's leading. So the central nervous system activity is slowly increasing, and that prompts interest, or interest, excitement, as an affect. When the person who's telling the joke tells the punchline, it's resolved, and the neural firing, the level of brain activity drops off, and that's experienced as enjoyment, joy. The main trigger for interest, excitement is novelty, things that we haven't encountered before. So for our students, we would hope that our classrooms are full of interest, excitement. As they're hearing about new things, their central brain or central nervous system activity increases. Once they feel they understand it, it drops off. So you have interest, excitement as you're hearing about it, and then enjoyment or contentment once they feel they understand it. Affects are often shown in presentations like this on the face of infants, because infants haven't yet learnt to mask their expression of affect, so you get the expression. Interest can be seen on the face of this young fellow here, and it's the track, look, listen response of infants, where they see something interesting and they follow it. Now that's the mild form of interest excitement. Obviously, we all know of little kids being really excited about something, and that's when the central nervous system firing is off the charts, and they're just over the moon with excitement. Enjoyment joy looks more like this guy, and it's a widening of the mouth, a smile. Usually, if it's genuine, the eyes are involved, so the eyes crease around the sides. These two positive affects are what we're trying to maximize in our daily life. The negative affect that I'm going to look at is shame, humiliation, and I'd say at the outset that I really wish Sylvan Tompkins had named it something else. I would call it deflation, because it doesn't have anything to do with our adult concept of shame. The affect shame humiliation is triggered whenever there is an impediment to ongoing positive affect, to ongoing interest, or to ongoing enjoyment that we want to continue. Whenever there's something in the road, shame humiliation affect is triggered. A simple example, a couple of examples. If I'm talking to you and we're enjoying an animated conversation about what we did on the holidays or something like that, and as I'm talking to you, you look at your watch. For a moment in me, there's a momentary deflation. That's shame affect being triggered, because I'm starting to interpret what you're saying. You're too busy to listen. You're not engaged in the conversation. Another example, let's say I'm sitting at a coffee shop watching some kids play in a park across the road, and they're playing a ball game that I'm not familiar with. So there's interest in trying to work out what the rules of this ball game are. And just when I start to think I've got it sorted, or starting to get sorted, a truck pulls up and parks right in front of me. There's going to be shame affect triggered. And I haven't done anything wrong. There's no fault on my part. There's just an impediment to ongoing positive affect, and it causes that deflation that we'll see. In this picture on the screen here, the little fella, the infant, has a typical shame reaction. His interest, probably in the toy he's holding, has been interrupted by his older brother giving him a kiss. Or at least that's how I'm interpreting the scene. The shame affect, we need to really stress this, is not the adult notion of being ashamed, though they are related. The shame affect is triggered whenever there's an impediment to ongoing enjoyment of positive affect. So ongoing interest or ongoing enjoyment, joy. The affect being triggered simply identifies that something has interrupted positive affect. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just something has interrupted positive affect, and it's there, the affect, shame and humiliation, is there to tell us that. Our adult notion of being ashamed is all about our biography, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. But that's about our emotional baggage being tagged on to shame affect being triggered. So if we go back to Nathanson's idea of the affects as a spotlight, we can talk about the spotlight of shame. Whenever we're frustrated, disappointed, rejected, confused, lonely, embarrassed, ashamed, mortified, or deflated, then shame affect is going to be triggered, because all of those words describe situations where interest or enjoyment are interrupted. In each case, remember, an affect triggers a physiological response which we become aware of as a feeling. In each case, the same physiological response is going to be triggered. There's a loss of muscle tone in the neck and shoulders, and that causes the head to slump. And that's an involuntary response. We don't look down because we're embarrassed. We're embarrassed, we feel embarrassed because our head looks down. It comes first. The physiological response comes first. There's often a blush, and that, once we were aware of the blush, makes us feel worse because we're exposed. We know that other people can see the blush. And importantly, Nathanson points out, in that moment, the prefrontal cortex, the cortex shuts down. This is a limbic system and below response, physiological response. He refers to it as cognitive shock. He says nobody can think clearly in that moment of shame. Brené Brown, another shame researcher, speaks about this as the warm wash of shame. And I think we can all experience that affect feeling. So Nathanson says on the face, shame, humiliation is signalled by the blush, but it's also expressed by a visible slump as muscle tone in the neck and shoulders is suddenly decreased. The look we call shamefaced includes this slump, plus a tendency to turn away from whatever had seemed so interesting just before. It produces a cognitive shock, and no one can think clearly in the moment of shame. Now, if you think about it, we're jumping ahead a bit here, but if you think about it, when a kid gives an answer in a class and it's wrong, or when you ask a question in the class and he doesn't know the answer, there's going to be shame affect triggered in him. You've all seen it. The head goes down and there's cognitive shock. There's no way he can work out the answer now because the cortex isn't working. And we obviously have to move on to somebody else and try and salvage the situation. But it's also worth pointing out that the kids in the room are not the only ones who are going to experience the shame affect. Whenever we're frustrated, whenever we're disappointed, whenever anything happens that challenges our view of ourselves as a teacher, shame affect's going to be triggered. You know, we're standing up in front of the class, we have a certain image of ourselves as a competent teacher. When we've taught something and we then turn around and ask questions to develop understanding or to test understanding, and the kids don't know what we just taught them, that triggers shame affect in us because it challenges our view of ourselves as a competent teacher and that we've just done a good job. So the takeaway from this bit is that shame affect is triggered in everyone hundreds of times each day, and it feels as crap for everyone as it does for you. The little girl on the left here is showing typical shame affect response, right? This is not shame emotion, this is affect response. The head bowed, looking away from what's been interesting. It's so universal that this meme was created on the right-hand side. It's actually shame, humiliation co-assembled with distress, another affect. But it's of 6 politicians who were caught in various sex scandals in the US. And in fact, it's become a meme, you know, how to tell if your dog is involved in a sex scandal. Well, he'd look like that. Now, dogs do have affect. And in the next slide, you'll see a dog experiencing and demonstrating shame affect.
Who did this mess? Who did this? Cody, did you make this mess? Maggie, did you make this mess? Somebody made it. Who made it? Who made this mess?
So why have we developed shame, humiliation as an affect? Well, it's fairly straightforward. Nathanson points out that as soon as the spotlight of shame goes on, remember the image of the crowded stage, As soon as the spotlight of shame goes on, it alerts us to the fact that there's an impediment, there's something wrong, there's a loss of positive affect. And we want to get that positive affect back. So our problem-solving brain is supposed to work on how we do that. But in the case of shame humiliation, it often points to things that we'd rather not think about. So we try to avoid working out how to move past it. So whenever interest, excitement or enjoyment, joy are impeded because we've done something wrong, but it may not be that we've done something wrong. It might just be something hasn't turned out the way we planned, or something has happened that we don't like, or someone has let us down, or we haven't measured up. We're not as beautiful or as tall or as thin or as young as we'd like to be. Something has challenged our image of ourselves as teachers or people or husbands or wives. When we don't know something or can't do something that we think we should be able to do, then shame, humiliation, affect will be triggered. And it causes the same unpleasant physiological responses in each of us. So the takeaway from this bit on the spotlight of shame is that the purpose of shame affect is to alert us to something we need to learn or to do. And it's a good thing, even though it might feel like crap.